Okay, well, welcome to our DTN session on art and art making at the end of modernity. And this is a series led by Christopher Losa. And maybe we should just take a sec and go around and say who we are, who's here. We got a couple new faces.
Yeah, exciting new faces. Welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome, new faces. And old faces, for that matter. Not that anybody's old. But...
No, certainly not. So Christy Conklin, I'm in Half Moon Bay, California.
Gordon Wood up in Seattle.
Hélène Montpetit in Montreal.
Colette Walker in Oakland, California.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Grossman, and I'm calling in from Brisbane, California, near the San Francisco airport.
I'm Rita Leduc. I'm calling from the Hudson Valley in New York.
Oh, lovely. And I am Christopher Losa, and I am on Sonoma Mountain in Sonoma, California. Should I take it from there?
Yeah.
All right. So this, for new folks, this series of conversations stems from my longtime inquiry for myself as a artist and just art art writ large, in terms of really diving deeply into the self-inquiry of why we create and how we create. And over the last couple of years, as Christina, and for those of you who know Michelle, who also co-leads this group, and I have as this forum has evolved, it's touched on a number of themes that have really struck deeply with me in terms of that notion of why we create and how we create, and of course over that same arc, the idea of art and its intersection with let's call it public messaging for the justice around all things, the justice of people, the justice of non-humans, the justice of nature. We've heard, the collective we have heard a lot about the role that art may or may not have to play in considering, conveying, and challenging those ideas. And so this series of conversations, set up for 4 or 5, this is number 2, is just to call in the community and that self-inquiry. I'm all about self-inquiry, but community conversation helps foment and facilitate that for me. And so I hope that by sharing conversation, we can spark interest, idea, inspiration in terms of how we all proceed with our practices. So with that background, just one last piece of background, just to, again, for those who are not part of the initial conversation, and this notion of art making at the end of modernity stems from that idea stems from a gentleman who started the Dark Mountain project, which is a UK-based arts collective, and his name is Dublin Hind, and he has now written a book that centers very much on this notion of art making, of being creative, here at the end of modernity. And he has this beautiful notion of how do we as artists do what we do, create livelihood, continue to produce art in a world where by necessity we have to keep one foot in this world of modernity, because and that is essentially saying that one foot in this world of modernity is that we all exist within this overarching set of structures that I put under I summarize as capitalism and consumerism. And
What's the name of the book? Do you know, Christopher?
At the end of ruin.
At the End of Ruin. Yeah. Wow.
Dougal. Dougal is Dougal, Dougald, Hein, Hinde.
Yes. Good old Scottish name, Dougal.
Yes. And so to exist, how's that for spell correction?
I know. Come on. Stupid.
So existing in some way within this capitalist and consumerist world that we exist in, even though we like to believe, or I have a belief, I hold a value of hospicing modernity to its end, in maybe not in my lifetime, but fingers crossed in my daughter's, who's turned 16 today, in her lifetime. So keeping one foot there, but also putting a foot into what is next, and with the beautiful embrace that we have no idea what is next. We can imagine, we can consider, plan, navigate towards, but how it all falls out is for sure beyond our comprehension. But we must navigate towards that transformation. And so,
do you have a particular question to start us off, or?
Yep. And so thank you for the segue. So again, conversation one was directed deeply around livelihood. And this conversation I'd like to open up about navigating within the systems and structures that as artists we are faced with. And that, you know, I think at one level, that is kind of this notion of the art world and what the art world demands of artists to, in air quotes, succeed. And how does that, and whether or not any of us succeed necessarily within that art world. My sense is that there's a waterfall, there's a trickle down that affects the way that we go into the public, we present our work, and we talk about how to generate livelihood from that work. And so the question is, what is your sense of barriers, opportunities to exist within the existing prevailing structures of the art world? And how do you challenge those and push against those and try to move to whatever is next?
What initially comes to mind for me actually is a book I read about conscientious objectors in World War I, when there was no such thing. There was no legal status for a conscientious objector. And you could as easily be shot on the front line as, you know, put to work on in a less violent role. And the courage these men had to defy all of society and not participate. And it was the most remarkable book I read, just because, you know, they were spat on and there was huge social movement against them, in addition to the personal risk. And the courage required to go against, just to walk away from the prevailing norms and refuse. And I don't know how that applies to us in this conversation, but that's what came to mind for me. It's like I feel like that's my ideal, would be to have that level of courage, you know?
Yeah. No, I think I hear it deeply applicable, you know, again, walking away from the norm, or walking, and I think many would argue that walking into the norm and attempting to, you know, change from within versus change from without. You know, that's a pretty consistent existential argument of, you know, are we more effective stepping into an environment, a culture that we want to change, or, as conscientious objectors have done, you stay outside of that culture, structure, organization?
I suppose in that scenario where you're stepping outside of the norm, in order to have some kind of impact, there still needs to be some presence of this other perspective then. So I suppose maybe that calls for more alternative spaces, or I guess the question for me then, and I don't have to make my livelihood at art, so I'm in a little different scenario, but if somebody does mean to make their living from art, that seems like it becomes a pretty good struggle, unless you have, you know, a day job. So maybe the role of the conscientious objector could be somebody who chooses to make their art and do something else for livelihood. I don't know.
Or to create an alternative. Maybe there's something because of course the economics is part of the problem, right? The whole system. So what are creative alternative economies, and how can art become or create, you know? You Christopher, you sent me a Dugaldheim lecture that was talking about like how art can be so complicit in just being like messaging, whereas the opportunity maybe right now is to find, like, the creativity is in creating a complete alternative systems and societies and methodologies that that can become what's next, you know, whether that's like a barter society, or like, where's the creativity in not making stuff, but in becoming the next social model.
No, that's cool. And that's really interesting within this forum, this broader deep transformation network. Like, can we challenge ourselves to begin to see that within this network? You know, I don't know off the top of my head what this network, what DTN has grown to globally in numbers, but I believe it's several hundred at least.
Thousands. It's about 3,000 now. You know, there is some mass there, and we haven't tackled yet like any of the, you know, honestly, like the fundamental economics of systems, you know, I feel like that's something that has to be addressed. It's just so
Right.
cool.
Yeah. Well, and I know I was anybody, because last general meeting, there was, what was the talk there not about what's next for DTN? Or I know I've seen.
There's a new vision statement, and it's, you know, it's quite high-minded. It doesn't actually kind of dig into, you know, it talks about sociocracy as a model, and that's great. But in terms of, you know, the nuts and bolts of how we fund new economic models that will be just and sustainable, like that's, you know, that's the $1 million question.
Yeah, but so not to go down the DTN path, but I love that this has brought up, you know, this notion of the creativity of envisioning and experimenting and putting forth new models, and yeah, and why not use this 3,000 strong network to test that,
Yeah.
and see what could come of it. The old proverbial put your money where your mouth is.
Indeed. Anyone else have thoughts to?
So many thoughts. I don't know that I can, trying to hold them all so I can weave them together eloquently, but it probably isn't going to work.
No need for eloquence. Let's hear
Well,
it.
I do want to say that I have come up with a technical term for the 1 foot in, 1 foot out scenario, which is the hokey pokey.
Yeah.
I find myself doing it often, but it also helps because it helps me maintain a levity
Yeah.
when I find myself having to do it.
Thank you.
I think, I mean, yeah, I think that artists have, I mean, I'm going to make maybe some sweeping statements here in the interest of brevity, but I think that artists have done themselves a disservice over time, in that we've sort of carved out such a niche for ourselves that it is now such a whole, like when you say the art bubble or the art world, like it is so specialized that it's quite closed off. And so it's super fun to like engage in that space with all your friends who all align with you, or you know, or don't, because that's starting to happen now too. But I find it quite closed. I find it quite a closed system, and not at all why I went into the business. And in fact, I didn't go into the business because it was a business at all. Like I went into it because for me, it was the closest way that I could learn from like the world's magic, right? Like I wanted to understand the world, and I was either going to do math or I was going to do art, and I decided to do art because it seemed just a little more flexible. But I never went into it thinking that I was going to make money, and I think that like that was really helpful for me. Like I am a professor, I teach, so that's like so that kind of handles, you know, just to the sustainability element or the business, like I'm able to kind of, you know, I became an installation artist. Now my work is becoming somewhat material again, but like I just never put the pressure on it to engage in the market of the art world. But nevertheless, I found myself in New York City, living in Brooklyn for 7 years, and like just being like swarming, teeming, like just really in it. And I would, like 5 or 6 years ago, ended up leaving the city and moving into the woods, and like in doing so was able to kind of really take a meta kind of perspective on like, hold on, wait a second, like what is success in and who are my people, and when do I want to engage in this space, because this is my space of expertise. And I do find a lot of like common friends here, right? Like it's not just a random sample of people, right? Like I do align with a lot of them. But I started looking for spaces where instead of the art being the common denominator. It was like passion for the world. It was like
Mm.
people who want to understand the world, people who want to be students of living and being. And that space is like a much less closed system. Like that's a very open, very, when you start to talk about disciplines, it becomes very interdisciplinary, but these are people that are hovering outside of even categorizing themselves, you know, right? Like, yeah, we all have livelihoods, we all have expert fields that we went into, but these are all people who are kind of operating upstream of that. And I've found that to be a really fertile space. And then I'm sort of, now I'm in a place where I'm like, okay, so, but I still do the hokey pokey, right? So what are the times that I decide to jump back in, aside from when I have to teach? And I'm noticing that like when I get excited to go back into an art space, it's because that space is somehow generating potential that goes beyond the art space. So it's not, so still using our lanes, like staying in my lane, using my field of expertise, but to kind of face outward and like explode outward into these bigger spaces, which I think, you know, DTN does nicely. I think that that does start to happen, this creating a porosity between the art space, right? Trying to undo some of that historical, you know, and it's no fault of artists. Like we were sort of ostracized, and so we carved out this very pretentious, very elitist space for ourselves so that we felt special. But now we're kind of like, oh, now we're really isolated from everybody else, and everybody else thinks that they can't interact with us because we're so specialized. And so we really have to try to break down those boundaries without sacrificing like the rigor or the whatever you want to call it, like the skill, the quality of what it is we're trying to do and say. So anyway, I mean, I'm just like kind of restating everything that's already been said, but just sort of sharing from my own perspective and kind of like how I've tried to manage it. And yeah, that's all.
I love that, the porosity of moving between both worlds. It's a great set of words. And I think that, you know, what you say, Reed, also ties back to this notion of, you know, in this microcosm of DTN, maybe maybe it's just a great opportunity to use this petri dish to test how to.
It feels like to me, like a really important word is exchange, right? Like exchange in ways that don't involve money, right? I don't know, somehow exchange of expertise, of skill, of objects, of time. And that's all DTN is, right? It's all completely volunteer. We're all just showing up because we care about the same issues.
Right.
How can our skill sets as both thinkers and makers be brought to bear on, you know, yeah, I just, you know, I guess I'm feeling like I'm moving out of the studio now and I have all this stuff. I've made all this stuff. What do I do with all this stuff? Right? I love making stuff and really don't care about selling stuff. Really don't care about, you know, I'd like somebody to enjoy it somewhere, but I have zero energy or interest in the piece that is getting from, you know, like from A to B. Like, I don't know, it's a struggle for me to know what to do.
Great. You mean you don't want to spend your day optimizing your Instagram posts?
Or doing my Etsy selling, you know, like I just don't.
Yeah.
I feel like putting it out on the street with a sign saying, yeah, take one, you know, like I really, and there are so few channels now. They're like, it just feels like you were saying, really locked up, like really frozen. And so to create a way to unfreeze it would be so liberating.
Yeah, it would.
It strikes me from Rita what you were saying that teaching is a really powerful place to be as both an artist and somebody who's learning, like as you were saying, learning about the world and living and thinking outside of the box of how we might need to do things very differently. So I'm excited to hear that you're in that position, because the next generation takes over from where we get ourselves to, for good or for ill.
What are you hearing from the youngsters?
Wow, actually, Christy, this week they're all talking about you. The class is Introduction to Environmental Arts.
Yeah.
This week's module was sustainable art, and so at the end they have to write about. I have like a spreadsheet of different artists, and so a lot of them have actually chosen you. So I've been grading them all morning, listening to what they think about your work and whether it addresses Timothy Morton's claims of what ecological art is. So
Really?
yeah, it's, I mean, look, teaching is an imperfect system too, and even that is like really hard to get. This is I mean, I kind of, it's a ridiculous situation. I mean, I just started teaching this class for Rutgers and wrote the course, and it's remote, and so it's like really kind of a sweet situation, but I get to actually talk about this kind of stuff with the students in addition to like, so they're going outside and they're making work out in nature and then coming back and thinking kind of philosophically about it. And so it's really, I mean, the grading is super tedious, but the ability to use it as a channel is like actually really wonderful. I mean, I do teach in person as well, but this particular class has been really a gift in that way, even if the grading is very rigorous. But I did want to say, Christina, you said something about thinking, and Christopher, you said something about like artists. I forget what you said, but the point is like, not only are we good at like making things and thinking about things, but we're also really good at improvising, and we're really good at being comfortable with process. So what I find is that like many people are, they're not comfortable with trusting their own intuition. And I think that like something that artists can really do is lead by example in terms of like showing people that like how to channel what my colleague would call the creative life force. Like, how do you become a conduit for that? And then how do you trust it enough to just do before you know, right? Like there's so many academics who need to know first before they can take a step. But that hasn't been working out so well for us. You know, I think that something that artists are so like experts at that we don't talk about because it usually happens behind closed doors is that like we know how to trust our intuition. And those of us that are working with nature, our intuition tends to be in alliance with the creative life force. So I think sometimes it's less about knowing what to do and more about being able to do. So I think that's also an asset that artists bring to the table. And I know it's like it's not goal oriented, so it's not particularly satisfying, but when you're doing it, it starts to show up and starts to reveal like, you know, its benefits, I think.
Right.
It's not very sellable, but we can at least show it.
But so much of where we need to get to has to do with this approach of process rather than product, and
Right.
means rather than end. And you know, it does feel really important to this work of deep transformation, right? Like,
that as you say, Rita, that intuition to iterate and be as much about the process as with the outcome, you know, to be, you know, in a sense, I think people see our output and think that's what we work towards. But, you know, it is, you know, the output is all right, whatever. Like I finished it, but it's thank you. Yes. At work in the ruins, not whatever I said. But, you know, iterating to iterating for discovery, iterating for what one perceives as perfection of X, you know, that deep comfort, to your point, to both your points, is an amazing asset for this time that I've never embraced. So thank you.
Beth?
Go ahead, Beth. Just no hand raising necessary. Just
Okay, well. So I think that a lot of it requires a reframing in terms of thinking about who we are as artists and what our roles are. And it's not for everyone because, you know, a lot of people go into art because they like a more you know, solitary life, or they like to work alone in their studios or whatever. But for me, I really think that it's about showing up everywhere I am as an artist, but as a leader, and inviting people into my process in some way to demystify the process, to demystify what art is, to have, for me anyways, I like to have my art be about the conversation, and then I think about what is the conversation I want to have, whether it's, you know, a social issue or the environment or people learning how to have interfaith dialogue or whatever. How do we interpret history? What is truth? You know, the kinds of questions that I'm interested in. I think that can all change with every artist, but it really is like, what's the conversation I want to have? Who do I want to have it with? And then how can I stop trying to fit myself into a system that's basically broken? And how can I make my own opportunities happen? So for example, I consider my city council and my city hall my muse. And a lot of it, I'm always trying to sort of see how far can I push things. And so I have a show there in our conference room right now. And in it, I put some titles up that I felt that our city council needed to hear because they're all going off the wall and backstabbing and doing all kinds of the same shit that's going on in national government. And so I put up a piece, and the title was, I made the title specially for this, community, respect, and trust. And it's sitting there in the conference room, and as is my 17-foot landscape about climate and the land, and it is a landscape of the mountain that we live on. And the way that nature and the extreme climate has changed our way of talking about it and is leaving its mark on it. So then I thought to myself, well, okay, the conversation, I don't just want people to like look at it and go like, ooh, I wonder how she did it. What was her process? That's like not interesting to me. Really, what's interesting is how, okay, this is what's going on. What is our landscape? We had two major landslides in our town last year, and power outages everywhere this last storm. What kind of things do we need to do? What kind of personal commitments are we going to make to actually care for the planet? And if everybody's doing something and we all share what we're doing, then it becomes, you start to feel like there is some momentum. So I convinced our city council to let me turn the conference room into an art studio for 3 sessions. And I've been inviting the public to come in and make climate action postcards with me. And I teach them a process that's similar to the painting that I'm doing. And then I ask people to write their commitment on the back. And then they get to leave their postcard up in City Hall as part of the exhibition. And then eventually I'm going to make some kind of format where I can send them to city governments and maybe, you know, Newsom's office or other places. And so that there's a sense, and I'm calling it Postcards to the Earth with Love from Brisbane. So anyways, that's kind of like one of my methodologies and one of the ways that I just keep busy and keep up my hope and keep myself out of despair. And also just kind of like going, the art world can do whatever it wants. It's a glorified store.
Mhm.
And I just basically go, I can shop there or not. I can sell there or not, or I can do what I really care about in the short time that I have on this planet as an artist and as a leader and as a community builder. And I think that if there's one word I have to put to like my methodology, it's relationships first. That's my 2 cents.
All right. I like that. I can either be in the shop or not.
We have agency.
Yep. True
And
enough.
it's not that I would be against it if something happened. It's just, or I met the right person. It's again, it's relationships. If I met a dealer that had similar goals and as I did and thought that she could get my work out into the world more, I wouldn't say no. Absolutely not. But I get to in the meantime, I'm not waiting around for that to happen. I'm just getting out there doing what I love to do and see what happens, see where it
Right.
goes.
Best we can do.
Mhm.
So Colette and I are collaborating in a different sphere, and we were talking the other day about how you can't solve this idea. You can't solve the current problems with the same old techniques, right? We need different tools. And it really does feel like what you were saying, Beth, like about relationality, locality, this breaking down of silos between, spheres of like what culture, politics. I don't know. I just that just occurred to me about we have to use a different set of rules and skills than the ones that have got us here. I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts.
Well, I think as we mature, we realize that what everyone's been talking about here, you realize you want to break out of boundaries even more. And so I concur a lot with what Rita has said and Beth has said about their process and interacting with different parts of our society, our community. And so how I've done that is, yeah, I always want to sell work because it's great to get the work out into other people's lives. But and that's a really interesting process. It's a different kind of energy. It's a part of the life force. But what I've been doing over the last few years, and then COVID really shut it down, which I think we all suffered from in a big way, is going back out and doing the hokey pokey and dance with different institutions and different organizations and different small community groups. So, and it's tied into a lot of my focus on bioregionality and Cascadia. And what I find is it's really rewarding, but it's also really challenging because you run into what we call the niches and the cliques of bubbles, and so you have to be able to, whatever way we're used to making a living or a livelihood, you have to step out of that and keep making efforts in different places to expand the network, cross-pollinate, and like you were saying, Christina, having these exchanges that are not always in the white box formula and locations. So that means sort of reaching out to different people in different types of disciplines and cross-pollinating and connecting all these different dots. And I find that incredibly rewarding. So DTN has helped me do that through this, like what we're doing now globally. But it's really important, I think, for us just to reach out, kind of like what Beth was doing with her city council and so forth, is you have to kind of cross over these boundaries that everybody has set up and sort of make offerings to say, these things can occur within different disciplines. And so you create different collaborations, and it's time consuming and takes a lot of energy, but it's also incredibly exciting, like when things start to click. and then integration occurs. And being in Seattle, you know, we have the tech industry that has really altered this city that I love, that I've been in for 40 years. And so we're, as artists doing what we do as thinkers and makers, we're all going to do this dance a little differently. And I'm just going to bring up something that an artist down in Tacoma shared with on social media, a article that I can post, written by, I think, I forget her first name, Rebecca Solnit. Yeah, who lives down in the Bay Area or San Francisco. And it's an incredibly intense article talking about how much San Francisco has changed because of the tech business in Silicon Valley. And she's lived there 40 years. And it resonated deeply with me. And so there's these structures that are built on money. And whether we all have to earn a living, but the what do you call it? The contrast, the contradiction between how powerful money is and then what we're talking about is really big. It's significant. And so to me, success in the art life, pursuing art is not about just making money. It's about doing what we're talking about right now and cross-pollinating with different disciplines so that other people can have these aha moments, start to use their intuition more and creativity more. And so years ago, I decided, because people would come up to me in my open studios and say, do you teach? I said, no, I don't teach because it's not in my nature to teach in classes, but I do mentoring. So I work one-on-one with a client, and they're adults who have given up their creative practice and they want to get back into it, which is a whole nother conversation about where our culture and society prioritizes creativity and the life force. And so I do it in baby steps in that process. And it's fascinating because people open up, and a lot of adults have put their creative practices to the side or totally put them aside, away because of careers and family and money. So the big conversation is, you know, for all of us, I think, is find out where your strengths are, continue to use that cognition, intuition formula combination, and go out there and dance with as many different people as you can. And DTN has really opened this up for me because of the conversations we're having, both in this group and some other groups and the larger group. And but you know, after COVID and the pandemic shutdown, I really, despite the value of what we're doing right here, just walking out there into the street and into your community is just to, you know, work on the micro level, and hopefully all of us can sort of, that gets disseminated into the macro level over time. But it's a big project.
You know, I would just jump in and say, Christy invited me to come today, and I'm really glad that she did, because this seems like such a useful conversation. And just listening to all of you speak, the project Christy and I are working on is a project in a new setting. It's at a conference for religious study scholars, and we'll be doing an installation that is a kind of an art-based inquiry. And I have no idea how this will go. This is a, you know, group of scholars, religious studies scholars, so they might be more open, but we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, a lot of what we're talking about, I'll go back, I think we talked about this in meetings last year, is, you know, the whole idea of modernism, postmodernism, and I like to think we're moving into postmodernism. Is Susie Gabluck's book, Has Modernism Failed? And she was a, incredible leader in this kind of thinking. And then there's of course a lot of other people that are included in that, but that's a good book to sort of go peruse again. And for everything that I've heard today, yeah, it would resonate with everybody. So
Maybe to build a little off of what you're saying, Gordon, because I so align with the, like, how did you put it? But going into these sort of interdisciplinary spaces, kind of.
Hey, Rita, can you maybe move closer to your mic?
Yeah.
I barely hear you.
Is that better?
yeah.
I think of it as like being a bumblebee, just kind of like hovering around and dropping down into these little spaces. But now I'm losing my train of thought. I was thinking how often, so sometimes when I do that, I work a lot with scientists, like in like field station kind of spaces, and not my colleague, he's an ecologist and he's fantastic, but other times I enter into these kind of siloed spaces, and because artists have been also siloed, there is sort of, I think, and I'd be interested in everybody's thoughts on this, almost like a misunderstanding or just like a lack of an understanding of artists' capacities in these other spaces. And so often when I go into these spaces, they have certain expectations that I am makes me feel like I have to really crouch and shrink to fit into the box that they want me to fit into, and I need to like get a massage afterwards or something. But like I don't like massages actually. But anyway, my point is just like that. I think as we all, if we choose to in our own, personal practices, sort of start to spread our wings and go bumblebee around to these other flowers, I find that there's a degree of awareness that I need to have to kind of stick to my, what am I here to do? Like, who am I working for kind of thing? And stay resilient in that kind of like partnership with the world. So that when I enter these other spaces, I'm not shrunken down into the understanding of what an artist is and can be that has been perpetuated kind of in the past 60 years or whatever, but that I'm really trying to break it open. So kind of the same as what I was saying, like when I feel like it's okay to re-enter back into the art space, when I go into these other spaces, which like, Gordon, you're right, they can be such amazing. I mean, this is what I live for. I live for these sort of interdisciplinary interweaving things, but sometimes there's a communication, there's a lost in translation thing that is sort of an initial piece that needs to kind of get broken through to allow for things to truly flourish and become. I don't know, I'm curious if others, I see some.
No, that's part of the the problem with specialization and fragmentation, that our culture has kind of created in the white box sort of mentality of the art world. So yeah, I totally concur. But the thing is when you go into these spaces, you sort of absorb and you learn as much as you can from what's going on. And then once you feel comfortable, you step out into it in a way of, raising your voice and reaching out to certain people, and things start to unfold. Just like, but I love your metaphor of the bee going to the flowers, because unfortunately, a lot of people, I keep running into all these progressive, people, individuals in these organizations that aren't connecting the dots between certain things. And so you have to kind of rock the boat a little bit with, and then, the aha moments come, and then they'll say, okay, yeah, let's have coffee. And then let's move to pulling other people into the conversation and dialogue. And then you co-create events and sort of events that the dialogue and conversation expands, and certain things just start to happen. But it's a what do you call it? Sometimes it happens really fast, but usually it's a very slow process of connecting the dots and building community. And I think post-COVID, right now it's like a really critical time to do that even more. So.
And Rita, going to the challenge of interdisciplinary work. From my personal experience, I've found, especially over the last 5 years, that the notion of art stepping into, especially science, a variety of sciences, art stepping into sciences as a way of collaboration, feels like it's become much more accepted, especially at the academic level. Would you not? That's not your experience?
It's yeah, I think it depends on like what you're there to do. I have if we had another hour, I think we could dive into this conversation. I think it depends. It's Beth said relationships. It depends on who you're
Right.
working with and what you're being asked to do and what the situation is. I mean, it really
Mm.
is, to Gordon's point, and every time I enter into a different silo space, it's a whole new ecosystem that I need to now understand, just in the way that I would go immerse myself in a forest and try to understand that, right? And so it is that specific. And so I try just to be that context, it's such an individualized context, depending, you could go to CERN, you could go to, I'm working on a field station up in New Hampshire. You could go, you could have if you have an NSF grant, that's like a whole different thing. If you're in the UK, that's a whole different thing, right? So there's just all these, there are many varieties of collaborations and really just, I prefer parallel play, which is what babies do when they just sit next to each other and they play next to each other and they start to influence each other, but it's not a sort of goal-driven, we need to collaborate. So anyway, so yes, there's some really successful, and I think people are starting to become more just hip to it. Like they're starting to see, as more and more people dive in, they're starting to understand the nuances, and that there are like so many different ways of doing this. It's not just one art side collaboration is not another art side, right? Like, these things are
Right.
obvious to us, but I think, especially to maybe reductionist scientists who like to categorize things, it takes some time for that specificity to take off. And I think it is happening, but I think it's also sometimes snapped, kind of gets a little stuck.
Yeah, I for sure, a broad brushstroke of saying it's this way or that. I totally agree that it's, that there's a lot of nuance.
Well, in terms of science, Christopher, Rupert Sheldrake, who we've talked about before with morphic resonance from England and Scotland, he's written books about the dogma of science that relates to the dogma of pretty much, whether it's religion or the art world, there's dogma everywhere. So I concur with everything about how do you parallel play with these different disciplines, and that's another part of the bigger dialogue. But Sheldrake's sort of approach to it, and he's kind of very controversial and revolutionary, and he's actually been kicked off of TED Talks. His TED Talk got knocked off TED, and then it got brought back on. But that's how controversial he is, and that had never happened before. But it's the idea of he's presenting things in terms of what you're talking about exactly, in terms of creativity and how it relates to science and art, and it's all integral. It's all connected. So, getting out of the silos and the boxes and we all have to just keep making efforts to do it. And I actually have relationships with a lot of scientists, and like I think a lot of us here, we're being informed by science, and we just need to keep reaching out to these people in different ways to work with them and sort of parallel play, like Rita said. It's the dogma gets in the way all the time.
For sure.
Yeah, and just for the sake of the recording, I mean, I'm in a wonderful, like, I don't mean to, I think there are some really, really successful collaborations with scientists. It's just, I think it runs the gamut. And again, because I'm teaching this class, I've had to, you know, show them all sorts of
We can
examples.
edit out that part if you're.
No, I don't think I said anything. I mean, I think I enjoy the space where like the spectrum bends into a circle, right? Like usually it's like art's over here and science is over here. And in fact, what should happen is it all bends and, and meets
Exactly.
spirituality or something. But
Sure.
but sometimes you find people who want to keep it aligned or who are trying to actually dissolve. Like I think I don't know, I just think there's a real value actually in the expertise. And I just have a lot of respect for, artists and scientists and what they're doing and the restrictions and the opportunities in those spaces.
Yeah, for sure.
I would just mention a couple things are coming to mind. One is Emergence magazine. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. There's I think they're in their 5th year now, but it's art ecology and spirituality, like that my sacred triangle right there. And they do really interesting work. And then there's another one called the Emergence Network .org, which is Bio Akomolafe's collaborative project that's brought together a bunch of organizations and has some really interesting alternative thinking about this idea of like the old systems can't build the new system, right? It's all going to emerge out of the cracks. Like what grows in the cracks is yet to be seen, and it's about emergence. It's pretty interesting. And then the other one was Bruno Latour, who died in the past couple of years, but French philosopher who worked a lot with artists. He was a philosopher of science, and so he did these huge shows with catalogs that are this thick of writing all around this art science intersection, and politics as well, those three. And fascinating. One of them is called Iconoclasm, and it's like about smashing the idols. And then the last one he did before he died was gosh, what's it called? Anyway, it's something about, well, the book was Down to Earth, and then there was this big art exhibition catalog that went with it. Anyway, I mean, I feel like there's so much happening actually on the continent, like much more so than in North America.
What's his name again?
Bruno Latour, Latour. He's a great writer. His book Facing Gaia is the 8 lectures on his very process-based philosophy, really undoing this idea, this like challenging sort of this modernity idea. It's one of my go-to guys. But I don't know how long we want to go. It's 1:02 now. If we want to, if people have final thoughts or.
Yeah. Helene, you have any? You've been quiet up there in my upper right-hand corner.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm in the middle. I'm between Christina and Gordon right now. So
Oh.
yeah, I think I come to all this from a very different place. I call myself a practical idealist. And I am rather naive, I think, with respect to all the issues you're talking about. Because I've been an artist my whole life, but I've never been a successful artist. And so I'm also a populist, right? So I don't believe in the elite. I believe in heart and I believe in communication. And I like what Rita was saying about the process. And I think Beth also mentioned the process. And I think that taking our art to a different level, and maybe addressing issues with our art. That's kind of like it's stepping into the unknown, and so all we can do is do it in any way, each in our own way. Like I can see that Colette and Christina are collaborating, and they have this installation idea, and they're going to kind of bring that out. Beth, I was really relating to what you were saying, because up here in Montreal, with the kind of project I'm developing right now, I was told, go to the municipal galleries because nobody else will show your work. And so that's what I'm doing. But it's an odd kind of project, which basically is showing people what people like Daniel Vall are doing, and the work that reconnects and all that stuff, that the general public is not usually familiar with. So in a sense, I'm doing more communications than what purists would call art. But I'm doing what I'm doing the way I do it because that's where I'm at now. And I'm knocking on doors, and I have not a clue if I'm going to get anywhere with it. But that's all part of the process. And I don't think, I'm really, really glad I came today, and I was looking for, like input, what are people doing and how are they going about it and everything else. But I don't like to over intellectualize stuff. I just like to stay right here. And, so yeah, so I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but I really appreciated everything. And I think I might kind of go tap a few people on the shoulder and say, what are you up to? How are you going about it? Yeah. So that's where I'm at.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for chiming in.
What was the one person you mentioned? Daniel Vall? Voll, is it?
Daniel Christian Vall, yeah, Regeneration.
Oh,
I
okay.
think it was WAHL.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. WAHL. Yeah.
Thanks.
It's only one of many. There's also Charles Eisenstein, the philosophy department. I mean, there's just, and a lot of them are here. They're on the DTM, I think. So yeah.
Or they've been, so a lot of them have had, so there's just, there are monthly meetings that is often an interview between the network founder, Jeremy Lent, and some luminary. And they're also, what I find interesting is some of the practice groups that are popping up. Like there's one called the Listening Space, and then there's that's just before the monthly meeting, and then there's 2 days after the monthly meeting. There's another kind of like a deep processing group that's very much built on a deep listening model. So it's not like a lot of chatter. It's like really trying to sink into the content that comes out of the monthly meeting, which can be very word heavy. But I've really enjoyed those post sessions as a way to actually be in space with other people about some of these topics.
Yeah.
I just want to say I put a link in the chat to a description of my project, and I'd appreciate any feedback. If you want to give me some, you can just maybe message me on DTM.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Beth, I don't know if you want to put a link to what you've got up now at City Hall. There's you had sent me a couple good images that were fun.
Yes, I'll look for it. It's on the city's website. I'll look for it briefly if I can get this.
She has this amazing 17-foot long painting that it's about the right size for the times we're in.
Elaine, I just tried clicking on it and it came up broken, but I'll try just Googling you. Maybe that'll get me there better.
Yeah, you're not probably the link that I tried to share is actually a private link, so you can land on my website, but you're not going to find the fudgesicle on there.
Okay.
So let me just go back and
Gotcha.
I just typed it up, but maybe I made a mistake in how I spelled it. Oh yeah, I forgot a hyphen. So here it is again. There you go.
Thanks.
All right.
Hope I
What a
don't
great
get
title.
sued for using fudgesicle. I tried to get in touch with them, but they're not responding. So
Cool.
All right. Well, I'll wrap up and say that I like as a prompt for our next conversation, because it's kind of come up between the lines, and then Beth said it out loud. How do we define success? And Rita has written on it. So let's take that as our, we'll craft that in some way to be topic number 3, because I think it's absolutely part of this is what is success for each of us as individuals, but also as individuals contributing to a generally somewhat of a collective practice of raising awareness in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, can I ask a favor? If you've done writing that is pertinent to any of these conversations, can people post links to them or post them on DTN under Artists and Creative, so we can actually print them out or read them on the screen and sort of because that helps sort of prep and give more information for all of us. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always thought within the DTN Artisan Network subsite, it'd be great to have some sort of repository of we all throw out so many different recommended readings or other artists that we should be thinking about, and it would be great to have a place of collective resource.
Yeah, a library of things.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think there is a way to do that, and I just need Mighty Networks has created something called Spaces. I'll look into it.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to put that, let me know.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Rita.
No, I just want to say logistically before we go, if I don't show up again, like it's very hard for me to make this time, and it's a snow day, so I took advantage of my partner being home. But please don't take it personally. I always want to come in addition to the monthly meetings, but because I'm on the East Coast, it's just a really tough time of day. So I'll try, and maybe I'll be able to make first half an hour or something like that. But it was really nice to be able to come here today, and I'm hungry for these kinds of conversations. I'll also put in the chat a group that I work with pretty closely, the ecologists that I kept mentioning, and that sacred triangle, Christina, I find shows up always in that space. So I'll do that. But I hope to see you all again, and I really appreciate this conversation.
Well, and we do want you to be a featured speaker too someday, so we'll just have to find that time.
If you haven't noticed, I do enjoy talking, so I'm happy to do that anytime.
I think we all do.
Indeed.
Great. Well, thanks everybody.
Good to see you. I'm going to run. Take care.
See you next
Thank
time.
you. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.